Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, the Home Alone 2 star and 45th President of the United States is coming to the end of what can only be described as an eventful term in office. Many of his actions have been steeped in controversy, and he is such a polarising figure that even the smallest of comment or action will be jumped on by one side whilst being vehemently defended by the other. And now, as he sits accused of inciting riots and ignoring the will of the people by refusing to accept the democratic vote, it got me thinking, how does he compare to his 44 predecessors? Were they upstanding pillars of the community that the people could say they were proud of? Or were they just as, or possibly more, controversial or provocative than Mr. Trump? Looking back over the last 232 years of presidents, it's quite clear that controversy is not new to the Oval Office. If only those walls could talk. Take Andrew Jackson, for example. The 7th President of the United States served between 1829 and 1837. To celebrate his inauguration, he held a party at the White House. A big party, with an open invitation to anybody that wanted to pop along. So many people turned up that it essentially turned into one of those parties you've seen in many a high school comedy. Too much booze, too many people, and by all accounts, it was chaos, and the White House was trashed, with people stealing anything that wasn't nailed down. There are even reports of partygoers ripping the curtains apart in search of a souvenir. Jackson would then go on to lead the country into a deep recession. But at least he knew how to party. And then we've got Andrew Johnson, who served between 1865 and 1869. Johnson was never elected president. He took over from Abraham Lincoln after he was assassinated. A tough act to follow, I'm sure. He also has the dubious honour of being one of only 2 presidents impeached by the House of Representatives. As a Southerner, he was selected as Lincoln's running mate to fill a quota and show that the party also represented the interests of the southern states and was never expected to lead. He went on to fight any bill or law that sought to increase the freedom of African American slaves after the abolishment of slavery. He fought against them being awarded citizenship and the right to vote, and he took away land that had been awarded to them in land distribution agreements. Yeah, he was a bit of an arse. He then fought with Congress on many matters, and often turned up drunk to rallies. Eventually, Congress had enough of him and impeached him in 1868. And let's not forget James Buchanan, Lincoln's predecessor. Serving from 1857 to 1861, Buchanan went out of his way to try and legalise slavery in Kansas and Nebraska, 2 states that had been slavery-free for the past 30 years. It was also under Buchanan's leadership that the southern states would secede, which was the beginning of what would eventually lead to the American Civil War. More recently, we have George W. Bush, who served from 2001 to 2009. On the back of events of September 11th and as part of the War on Terror, he ordered the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, and then the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The latter was particularly controversial, as Bush had stated Iraq were in possession of weapons of mass destruction that they intended on using on the West. However, to this day, no WMDs have been found. There were also claims that the invasion of Iraq was an attempt to gain revenge for his father, George W. Bush Sr.'s failed attempts to remove Saddam Hussein from power during the Gulf War. And then there's a never-ending list of conspiracy theories that accuse Bush of being implicit in the events of September 11th. Then of course we have Bill Clinton. I was 15 when the news of this scandal broke, and at the time I thought he was somewhat of a legend. He played the saxophone and he banged his secretary. I always thought this is what would happen if Will Riker was put in charge of the Enterprise, exploring the universe, sending Cuban cigars where no Cuban cigar had gone before. I'm referring, of course, to the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, which came to light in 1998. At first, he denied it.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
As more information was released, he was forced to tell the truth and admit it.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Ms. Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong.
Which led to Clinton becoming only the 2nd president to have been impeached. It does seem, however, that the bigger scandal came to be that he lied and covered up the affair. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he just admitted to the whole thing. And we can't talk about dodgy presidents without mentioning the king of controversy himself, Richard Nixon, who served between 1969 and 1974. What was to become known as the Watergate scandal is by far the most famous of any presidential scandal. During the 1972 presidential election, FBI and CIA agents broke into the offices of the opposing Democratic Party, spied on them and stole secret documents. It would later turn out that Nixon authorised this, but it wasn't the actual act that got him into trouble. Much like Clinton, it was the fact that he tried to cover it up. He even appeared on TV and announced,
"People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook."
But the Washington Post broke the story and congressional investigation followed, which led to Nixon becoming the first and only president to resign from office. Resigning meant that he couldn't be impeached and charged with a crime. Any chance of charging him with a crime would be thwarted by his successor, Gerald Ford, who in his own piece of controversy pardoned Nixon for any crimes he may have committed. Of all the presidents I have discussed, Nixon reminds me of Trump the most, as Nixon also came into power at a time when America was divided. Issues such as Vietnam, the assassination of Martin Luther King and the Black freedom struggle had created huge divides in the country. Nixon then rode a wave of popularity by appealing to the base fears that many Americans had at the time. Are any of these presidents more controversial than Donald Trump? It's hard to say, and will depend on your point of view. He hasn't started any wars, hasn't slept with any of his staff that we know of, and hasn't thrown any legendary parties. But saying he isn't controversial simply because there are worse presidents probably isn't the best scale to judge him on. Of course, let's not forget that controversy is in itself subjective. Abraham Lincoln, although remembered as a hero, was hugely controversial in his day, as his views on slavery and democracy were not held by all. Barack Obama was controversial simply because his name wasn't American and his skin was black. But no matter your view, in the coming days, Donald Trump's presidency will come to an end, and history will judge him just as it did his predecessors. Either way, Joe Biden is taking over a United States that is anything but united, and has a real challenge ahead of him if he's looking at bringing the American people back together and healing those wounds that have left them feeling so divided.